In 1947, an event occurred that would quietly embed itself into the fabric of human curiosity, skepticism, and fear. An event that, even decades later, continues to challenge our understanding of reality. It began in the deserts of New Mexico, near a small town called Roswell. At first, it appeared to be a routine incident. Something had fallen from the sky. But within hours, the situation transformed into something far more complex. Something controlled, restricted, and ultimately concealed. Local rancher William Brazel was among the first to discover the debris scattered across his land. He described it as unlike anything he had ever seen before. Thin metallic sheets that could not be bent or broken. Lightweight structures that returned to their original shape even after being crumpled. Materials that did not burn, scratch, or degrade in any conventional way. These were not ordinary fragments. When the military arrived, they didn't treat it like a routine recovery. They sealed off the entire area. Armed personnel secured the perimeter. Witnesses were instructed to remain silent. Within a short time, the U.S. Army Air Forces issued an official statement claiming they had recovered a flying disc. That single statement ignited global attention. For a brief moment, the world stood still, faced with the possibility that humanity was not alone. But just as quickly as the story broke, it was taken back. Within 24 hours, the narrative changed. The flying disc was suddenly reclassified as a weather balloon. A simple, harmless explanation replaced something extraordinary. And that's where the real mystery begins. Because if it truly was just a weather balloon, why was the response so intense? Why were witnesses silenced? Why were initial reports altered so quickly? Why did the military contradict its own statement within a day? These inconsistencies planted the seeds of doubt that would grow stronger with time. Over the years, several individuals came forward with accounts that painted a very different picture. Some claimed they had seen bodies, not human, but humanoid. Small in size, large heads, unusual features. Others described transport vehicles arriving at night, carrying unknown objects under heavy security. One of the most controversial claims came decades later, when individuals who identified themselves as former military personnel spoke about classified operations involving non-human technology. According to them, what was recovered in Roswell was not just debris. It was something far more advanced than anything known to humanity at the time. Technology that didn't belong to this world. Of course, these claims were met with skepticism. Critics argued that memory can be unreliable, especially when recalling events from decades ago. Some suggested that the entire incident was part of a classified military project, specifically Project Mogul, which involved high-altitude balloons designed to detect Soviet nuclear tests during the early Cold War period. This explanation seemed logical, but even that theory had gaps. The materials described by witnesses did not match known components of Project Mogul. The level of secrecy, the rapid narrative shift, and the long-term silence all pointed toward something deeper, something that remained hidden beneath layers of official explanations. As time passed, Roswell evolved from an isolated incident into a cultural phenomenon. It became a symbol of secrecy, of hidden truths, and of humanity's endless search for answers beyond Earth. But Roswell was not the only case. Across the globe, reports of unidentified flying objects began to surface with increasing frequency. Pilots, radar operators, and even astronauts reported encounters with objects that moved in ways that defied known physics. Sudden accelerations, silent flight, impossible maneuvers. These were not random sightings. These were consistent patterns. And patterns suggest intelligence. Governments around the world initially dismissed these reports. But behind closed doors, investigations were quietly conducted. Programs were created. Data was collected. Observations were recorded, but rarely shared with the public. This dual approach, public denial, private investigation, only deepened the mystery. Because it raised a critical question. If there is nothing to hide, why investigate in secret? The truth is, throughout history, humanity has always looked toward the sky with curiosity. Ancient civilizations documented strange objects in the heavens. Unexplained lights. Moving stars. Beings descending from above. Were these early interpretations of the same phenomenon? Or something entirely different? Modern science has expanded our understanding of the universe. We now know that there are billions of galaxies, each containing billions of stars. Statistically, the idea that Earth is the only planet with intelligent life seems increasingly unlikely. Yet despite this vast probability, we have no confirmed contact, or at least, none that has been officially acknowledged. And that's where the tension lies, between what is possible and what is revealed. The Roswell incident stands at the center of this tension, not because it provides clear answers, but because it refuses to fit into a simple explanation. It challenges logic. It raises questions. It forces us to consider possibilities that are both fascinating and unsettling. Because if the truth is what some believe it to be, then everything we know about our place in the universe may need to be redefined. And perhaps the most important question is not whether aliens exist, but whether the truth about them has already been discovered and simply kept out of reach. If Roswell was the beginning of modern suspicion, then what followed in the decades after only intensified the mystery. Because Roswell did not remain an isolated event. It became a pattern. As the Cold War expanded, so did reports of unidentified aerial phenomena. But this time, the witnesses were not civilians. They were trained military personnel, individuals whose observations were not based on imagination, but on discipline, precision, and experience. One of the most compelling cases emerged in 1980, deep within Rendlesham Forest in the United Kingdom. Often referred to as Britain's Roswell, the incident involved multiple U.S. Air Force officers stationed at a nearby NATO base. Over several nights, these officers reported seeing strange lights descending into the forest. When they approached the area, they claimed to have encountered a triangular object resting silently among the trees. It emitted a soft glow. Its surface appeared smooth, almost liquid-like. Symbols were reportedly etched along its sides, symbols that resembled no known language. What makes this case particularly significant is not just the sighting, but the documentation. Audio recordings were made in real time. Official reports were filed. Radiation levels were measured at the site, showing readings higher than normal background levels. These were not stories told years later. These were events recorded as they happened. And yet, despite the evidence, no definitive explanation was ever provided. The official stance remained cautious, non-committal, vague, and ultimately inconclusive. But behind that uncertainty, something else was happening. Governments were not ignoring these incidents. They were studying them. In the United States, a series of classified programs were quietly initiated to investigate unidentified aerial phenomena. One of the earliest was Project Blue Book, which ran from 1952 to 1969. Its purpose was simple: to collect, analyze, and determine whether UFO sightings posed a threat to national security. Over 12,000 cases were recorded. Most were explained, but not all. Hundreds of sightings remained classified as unknown. Objects that could not be identified, movements that could not be explained, behavior that did not align with any known aircraft or natural phenomenon. And this is where the narrative begins to shift. Because unknown does not mean non-existent. It means unexplained. Decades later, the conversation resurfaced, but this time with something far more tangible. In 2004, a U.S. Navy strike group operating off the coast of California encountered something that would challenge even the most skeptical minds. This event is now widely known as the Tic Tac UFO incident. Multiple fighter pilots, including Commander David Fravor, reported visual contact with an object unlike anything they had ever seen before. It had no wings, no visible propulsion system, no exhaust, and yet, it moved. Not just fast, but impossibly fast. The object could accelerate from a stationary position to hypersonic speeds within seconds. It could drop from high altitude to sea level almost instantly. It could hover, change direction mid-air without inertia, and disappear from radar without a trace. These are not characteristics of advanced aircraft. They defy the fundamental laws of physics as we understand them. What makes this encounter even more compelling is the level of verification. Radar systems tracked the object. Infrared cameras recorded it. Multiple pilots witnessed it independently. This was not a single perspective. It was a multi-layered confirmation. And yet, once again, no clear explanation followed. For years, the footage remained classified, until it was leaked, and later, confirmed. In an unprecedented move, the U.S. Department of Defense officially acknowledged the authenticity of the videos. They referred to the objects as unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, deliberately avoiding the term UFO. A subtle shift in language, but a significant one, because it indicated something important. The phenomenon was real, not explained, not understood, but real. This acknowledgement marked a turning point. For the first time, the conversation moved out of conspiracy and into credibility. Suddenly, what was once dismissed as imagination was being discussed in official reports, government briefings, and even congressional hearings. Pilots began speaking openly. Officials began admitting limitations. Scientists began asking serious questions. And the public began paying attention. But with this new transparency came a deeper layer of uncertainty. Because the question was no longer, "Are these sightings real?" The question became, "What are they?" Several possibilities have been proposed. Some suggest these objects are advanced technology developed by foreign adversaries, nations that have made breakthroughs far beyond what is publicly known. But this explanation raises concerns. If such technology exists, it represents a level of superiority that would completely shift the global balance of power. Others believe these phenomena may not originate from other planets, but from other dimensions. The idea that reality itself may have layers we do not yet understand. It sounds theoretical, but modern physics does not dismiss it entirely. Concepts like parallel universes, higher dimensions, and space-time distortions are actively explored within scientific research. Then, of course, there is the possibility that continues to capture the public imagination. Extraterrestrial intelligence, not as a concept of science fiction, but as a reality that has remained just beyond confirmation. If this is true, it changes everything. It changes how we see ourselves, how we understand life, how we define intelligence, because it would mean that humanity is not the center of awareness, but just a part of something much larger. And perhaps that is why the truth, if it exists, is handled with such caution, because the impact would not be limited to science. It would affect belief systems, religions, philosophies, power structures. It would redefine what it means to be human. And maybe, just maybe, we are not fully prepared for that shift. So instead of clear answers, we are given fragments, declassified reports, short video clips, carefully worded statements. Enough to confirm that something is there, but not enough to fully understand it. And that leaves us in a strange position. Aware, but uncertain. Informed, but incomplete. Standing at the edge of a truth that feels close, yet remains just out of reach. Because the deeper we look into these encounters, the clearer it becomes. This is not just about objects in the sky. It is about the limits of human understanding, and what lies beyond them. As the mystery deepens, one uncomfortable realization begins to surface. This phenomenon is not limited by geography, politics, or time. It is global. Reports of unidentified aerial phenomena are not confined to the United States or the United Kingdom. They have been documented across continents: Russia, China, Brazil, India, and even remote regions where technological interference is minimal. Different cultures, different governments, different levels of advancement. Yet, the same pattern. Objects appearing without warning, moving in ways that defy known physics, disappearing without leaving a trace. And perhaps most intriguing of all, consistent descriptions. Across decades, across languages, across completely unrelated witnesses, the details remain strikingly similar. Disc-shaped crafts, silent movement, sudden acceleration, intelligent control. This consistency raises a critical question. How can so many people, in so many places, describe the same phenomenon without coordination? Skeptics argue that human perception is flawed, that the brain fills gaps, creates patterns, and sometimes misinterprets ordinary objects as extraordinary ones. And they are not entirely wrong. Human perception is imperfect. But imperfection does not explain repetition at this scale. Because when trained observers, pilots, engineers, radar operators, report the same behavior using different systems of verification, the margin for error becomes significantly smaller. This is where the discussion begins to shift from belief to analysis. Because now, it is not just about what people think they saw. It is about what systems have recorded. Modern tracking technologies do not rely on human imagination. Radar, infrared sensors, satellite imaging, these systems operate on measurable data. And in multiple cases, these systems have detected objects that perform beyond known technological limits. Objects that accelerate without visible propulsion. Objects that operate seamlessly between air and water. Objects that appear, disappear, and reappear at different coordinates within seconds. These are not random anomalies. They are patterns. And patterns suggest intention. This brings us to one of the most debated aspects of the phenomenon: behavior. Because these objects are not simply drifting through space. They are interacting. There have been multiple reports of UAPs approaching military aircraft, matching their speed, observing them, and then disengaging without aggression. No attack. No communication. Just observation. This behavior has led some analysts to propose a theory that is both fascinating and unsettling. Surveillance. Not in the way humans understand surveillance, but something more advanced. More calculated. More patient. If these objects represent an intelligence beyond our own, then their actions suggest curiosity rather than hostility. Observation rather than invasion. But even that raises deeper questions. What are they observing? Our technology? Our behavior? Our progress? Or something else entirely? Because if observation is taking place, then it implies awareness. And awareness implies intelligence. At this point, the discussion moves beyond technology into psychology. How does humanity respond to the idea that it may not be alone? Historically, such ideas have been met with resistance. Not because of lack of evidence, but because of the implications. The human mind seeks stability. It prefers certainty. It builds its understanding of the world on structured beliefs, scientific, cultural, and philosophical. The introduction of an unknown intelligence disrupts that structure. It creates uncertainty, and uncertainty creates discomfort. This is why, for decades, the topic of UFOs was dismissed, ridiculed, and pushed to the edges of serious discussion. Not necessarily because it lacked credibility, but because it challenged comfort. But now, that is changing. Slowly, but noticeably. Governments are becoming more transparent. Scientists are becoming more open. Media coverage is becoming more serious. And the public is becoming more curious. Not in a sensational way, but in a thoughtful one. People are beginning to ask better questions. Not, is this real? But, what does this mean? And that shift is significant, because it marks the transition from denial to inquiry, from reaction to reflection. But even as awareness grows, so does complexity. Because the more data is revealed, the less simple the answers become. There is no single explanation that fits all cases. No unified theory that accounts for every observation. Instead, what we have is a collection of fragments, each pointing toward something larger, but none providing the full picture. And perhaps that is the most honest position we can take. We don't know. Not completely. Not yet. But not knowing does not mean ignoring. In fact, it demands attention. Because throughout history, every major breakthrough began with uncertainty. Electricity, gravity, quantum mechanics. All of these concepts once existed as mysteries, questions without answers, until someone chose to explore them seriously. And that is where we stand now, at the edge of a question that may redefine our understanding of reality itself. Because if even a fraction of these encounters represent something beyond current human capability, then we are not just observing unknown objects. We are witnessing the limits of our own knowledge. And beyond those limits, There is something waiting to be understood. But understanding requires more than curiosity. It requires patience, discipline, and the willingness to accept that the truth may not align with our expectations. Because the universe does not operate based on human comfort. It operates based on reality. And reality is often more complex than we imagine. So as we continue to collect data, analyze patterns, and question assumptions, one thing becomes increasingly clear. This is not a closed case. It is an open investigation. One that spans nations, generations, and disciplines. One that challenges not just our technology, but our perspective. Because in the end, the question is not just about what is out there. It is about how ready we are to understand it. At some point, every investigation reaches a moment where facts alone are no longer enough. Because beyond the data, beyond the sightings, beyond the reports, there is meaning. And meaning is what defines impact. Up until now, we have explored patterns, behavior, and global consistency. We have questioned perception, analyzed evidence, and examined the possibility of intelligence beyond our current understanding. But now, we arrive at the most important layer of all: implication. Because if even a small percentage of these phenomena are real, truly unexplainable by current human technology, then the consequences are not limited to science or defense. They extend into something far deeper. They challenge identity. For centuries, humanity has operated under a central assumption. We are alone. Not necessarily in a literal sense, but in a dominant one. We are the most intelligent known species. We are the observers. We are the decision-makers. Everything we have built, our systems, our philosophies, our ambitions, rests on that foundation. But what happens when that foundation is questioned? Not destroyed, just questioned. Because even the possibility of another intelligence, one that operates beyond our understanding, forces a shift. A shift in perspective. A shift in importance. A shift in control. And this is where the real discomfort begins. Because it is not fear of invasion that unsettles people the most. It is the loss of certainty. The realization that we may not fully understand the environment we exist in. That there may be layers to reality that we have not yet reached. And that our position may not be as central as we once believed. But here is where clarity becomes important. Uncertainty is not weakness. It is the beginning of expansion. Every major leap in human history began with a moment like this. A moment where existing knowledge reached its limit. When the Earth was thought to be flat, exploration challenged that belief. When gravity was misunderstood, observation reshaped it. When space was unreachable, curiosity overcame it. And now, once again, we stand at the edge of something unknown. But this time, the unknown is not just physical. It is existential. Because this question is not only about what is out there, it is about who we are in relation to it. Are we explorers, observers, participants, or simply a small part of something much larger? These are not easy questions, and they do not require immediate answers. Because understanding something of this scale takes time. It takes generations. It takes openness. And most importantly, it takes honesty. Honesty to admit what we know. And honesty to accept what we don't. Because right now, both exist side by side. We know that unexplained phenomena are being observed. We know that some of these objects demonstrate capabilities beyond known technology. We know that global patterns exist, but we do not yet know the source. We do not know the intention, and we do not know the full picture. And that is okay, because not knowing is not failure. Ignoring is. And for the first time in decades, it seems that humanity is choosing not to ignore. Instead, it is watching, listening, analyzing, slowly shifting from dismissal to awareness. And that shift may be the most important development of all, because awareness changes behavior. It changes priorities. It changes the way we approach the unknown. Instead of reacting with fear, we begin to respond with curiosity. Instead of rejecting uncertainty, we begin to explore it. And that is where real progress begins. But there is another layer to this story, one that is often overlooked, and that is the human response itself. Because regardless of what these phenomena turn out to be, they are already changing us. They are forcing us to think differently, to question more deeply, to look beyond immediate explanations. And in doing so, they are pushing humanity toward a more advanced state of awareness. Not technologically, but mentally. Because true advancement is not just about building better machines. It is about developing better understanding. And perhaps that is the purpose behind all of this. Not necessarily to reveal something immediately, but to prepare us, to expand our thinking, to test our ability to handle uncertainty, to observe how we react when faced with something we cannot fully control. Because if there is one consistent pattern in all of this, it is patience. Whatever this phenomenon is, it is not rushing. It is not forcing interaction. It is not demanding attention. It is simply present, observed occasionally, understood partially, but never fully revealed. And that restraint suggests something important. Intent. Not aggressive, not chaotic, but controlled. And control implies intelligence, which brings us back to the original question. Who is actually in control? At first, the answer seemed simple. Humans, governments, technology. But now, it is not so clear, because control is not always about dominance. Sometimes it is about awareness. The more aware you are of a system, the less it controls you. And perhaps that is where we are heading. Not toward immediate answers, but toward deeper understanding. Because in the end, this may not be a story about aliens, technology, or secret programs. It may be a story about humanity itself, about how we respond to the unknown, about whether we choose fear or curiosity, denial or exploration, silence or understanding. Because the truth is, whatever is out there has always been there. The only thing that is changing is us. And maybe that's the real revelation. Not the objects in the sky, but the shift in the human mind. Because once that shift happens, once curiosity replaces fear, once awareness replaces assumption, there is no going back. The way we see the world changes. The way we see ourselves changes. And the way we approach the future changes. So as this investigation continues, quietly, globally, and without final answers, one thing remains certain. This is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a much larger one that will unfold over time, one that will challenge everything we think we know, and one that will ultimately answer not just the question of what is out there, but the far more important question: are we ready to understand it?